It's not uncommon for me to have conversations with clients around the fact that they're tracking all of these metrics, but we're not really using them to change behaviors or tell us anything that we need to continue to dig deeper and deeper into more problems. So I think that it's important before we go down the rabbit hole of tracking more and more metrics, we simply ask ourselves how that data will be valuable. A question I like to ask my clients or have them ask themselves is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve with this information? And does this help me make informed decisions? What is going on, my friends? Welcome back to another episode of the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. I am your host, Ben Brown, as always, owner and head coach here at Body Systems. Today, we're talking about the top 5 metrics that every high performer should track. And, one of the things that we leverage in our business that helps us create great results for our clients is data. We leverage data to make informed decisions. And if you're a high performer, if you're someone who owns a business, if you're a decision maker, if you're an executive, probably if you're just a structured person in general, then you also use data to make informed decisions. You use data around probably your business metrics. You have your P&Ls, you have your expense and income statements, you have your KPIs, your key performance indicators for your employees and your team. You have some semblance of structure that you rely on to ensure that you're making the decisions that you need to make and to give you feedback that's going to allow you to make the right decisions given the circumstances. And that's why data can be so terribly valuable, especially in the health and fitness space. Here's the deal, though. It's very, very easy to get distracted by the amount of data that we have access to now, right? We've got all of the tractors, we've got all of the diagnostic testing, we've got metrics and data around so many different components of health and fitness. We've got blood glucose monitors, we've got genetic testing, we've got food sensitivity testing, we've got gut health, we've got adrenal labs, we've got parasite and cortisol tests, and the list goes on and on and on, to the degree that it's not uncommon for me to have conversations with clients and prospective clients around the fact that they're tracking all of these metrics, but we're not really using them intelligibly to change our behaviors or really to be able to tell us anything outside of the fact that we need to continue to dig deeper and deeper into establishing and identifying ultimately more problems. So I think that it's very important before we go down the rabbit hole of tracking more and more metrics, we simply ask ourselves how that data will be valuable. And in other words, a question I like to ask my clients or have them ask themselves is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve with this information? And does this information give me the data to help me make informed decisions? And so I'll share with you the metrics that we use in our coaching business that can give us immediate, objective feedback to help us move the needle and help our clients change their behaviors in meaningful ways that ultimately will help shift the data in a positive way. That's what we're looking for. That's what I want for my clients. That's what I want for myself. And of course, that's what I want for you guys. Now, the reason why this is so important is because I spent a lot of time and energy in my career focusing on the wrong things. And it wasn't even that it was the wrong things per se. It was just, like I alluded to, running all kinds of diagnostic testing. So let me take a step back a second and Perhaps you've heard me talk about it before, but growing up, I was and experienced a lot of different stomach issues that kind of plagued me for years and years, to the degree that I had a hard time eating certain foods. I had a lot of gastric distress. I'd throw up all the time, had IBS type symptoms. This was basically through high school and college and even into graduate school. And this was part of what prompted me to get into the health and fitness space in the first place, is because I just had to dig down the rabbit hole of figuring out what was going on with me and how to understand nutrition and supplementation in a way where I ultimately could heal myself, because conventional medicine wasn't doing it for me. They had run all the tests, they had prescribed all of the medications, and at the end of the day, nothing really worked. And it wasn't until I started studying functional medicine and started running diagnostic tests around gut health and adrenal health, and ended up diagnosing and realizing I was suffering from a pretty severe case of H. pylori, to say nothing of the fact that because I had been on round after round after round of antibiotics growing up, what I came to find out was, like, from the time I was like a newborn, I was on antibiotics, on and off for, until I was 18 years old. I had just wiped out my healthy gut bacteria. And so the testing was pivotal in helping me acknowledge that the integrity of my gut was compromised and that there was a latent infection at play that I needed to resolve. And so I was very fortunate to be able to start to understand functional medicine, start to understand supplementation, and how to leverage the two in conjunction with healthy nutrition to rebuild that gut integrity, to eradicate the infection at play, and ultimately kind of resolve the issues that I had been experiencing. And it was through that process that I really realized and had learned so much, to the degree that I realized I had this invaluable skill set to be able to help other people do the same. Now, the thing is that just because I had those tools doesn't mean it was the right tool for everyone. And the reality also was that I wasn't working with a sick population. I was working with a relatively healthy population of people who simply just wanted to get stronger, get leaner, lose weight. And because that was the only thing I knew at the time, this was when I was in my mid-20s. So we're talking 20 years ago, 18, 20 years ago, when I first started to study functional medicine, I thought it was the end all be all. I thought it was the panacea, to the degree that if someone was struggling to lose weight, it was like, well, we need to run diagnostic testing. There's probably an infection. We need to completely eliminate gluten and dairy and sugar, and you need to eat extremely clean and yada, yada, yada. Well, needless to say that didn't go over very well for people. And I wasn't looking at the obvious things. I wasn't looking at just the overall movement and the calorie intake, the things that we know are simply the low-hanging fruit for the vast majority of people. Fast forward 15 to 20 years down the road, and I've been through every gamut of testing and data collection process, to the degree that, simpler is better for the vast majority of people. And I was having a conversation with a colleague, an incredibly smart woman, the other day, and friend. And she was kind of picking my brain about a couple things. And she was talking about her adrenal health and how her cortisol levels are high and her insulin's high. And, she thinks she's not eating enough and she's getting overly exhausted in the gym. And essentially, at the end of the day, we really just kind of acknowledged that, like, well, she's not moving enough, and she's probably, despite not realizing it, probably eating too much. And so we didn't need profound set of testing, an expensive set of testing modules to be able to determine that. It was simply a logical line of questioning, looking at her existing behaviors, her existing intake, her food choices, her physical activity levels or lack thereof, to the point where it became like, yeah, dude, like, you probably don't feel great. You probably don't have a lot of energy. You're probably storing more body fat because you are not in good shape. Like, we just need to get a bit more control over your nutrition, get you moving more consistently, especially with some strategic cardiovascular fitness training, to improve your aerobic health, build a bigger engine, improve your cellular function, improve your mitochondrial function. And that is more than likely going to do it for you. And we don't need to necessarily go down the rabbit hole of like thinking that there's something wrong with your metabolism. So there's a little background around kind of, this feed forward cycle around. Usually the simplest explanation is the right explanation. But with that said, let's talk about the metrics that are really serving my clients right now so we can just dial in right away around the most logical things that are going to help us move the needle and the metrics that, in my opinion, every high performer should be acknowledging and utilizing to help them improve their health and fitness. So the first is VO2 max. Now, VO2 max, you might remember this from, high school, or perhaps if you studied exercise in college, and maybe you hear about it in terms of cardiovascular health and fitness. And it's something that really isn't looked at nearly enough, in my opinion, especially because cardio for a long time got a bad rap. And so here we are, and I bet wouldn't be surprised if you start hearing a lot more about the impact and importance of cardiovascular fitness as it pertains to health and longevity. And so looking at VO2 max, VO2 max really is the number one longevity indicator that we're likely ignoring. And VO2 max matters because it is a direct reflection of our cardiovascular capacity and our metabolic efficiency. And so what we know very clearly is VO2 max is one of the strongest predictors of our lifespan and of our all-cause mortality. And having a low VO2 max contributes to having a low level of resilience under stress, both physical and emotional. And so if we can acknowledge that if we want to live longer, if we want to have a higher and longer, better quality of life, if we want to lose body fat more efficiently, if we want to be able to consume more calories, if we want to be able to better manage our blood sugar levels, if we want to be more resilient and better handling stress, then we probably should find ways to both test and improve our VO2 max levels. So how do we do that? How do we measure VO2 max? Well, there are some wearable devices that can estimate VO2 max, but the simple way that we do it, there's two ways. You can simply go to a lab nearby. So there's labs called DexaFit, and more frequently now are popping up clinics that have metabolic testing at play, and they would need a metabolic cart. And basically you get hooked up to this machine and you put on kind of a oxygen mask type thing. And whether you're doing it on the treadmill or the bike, you'll go through a protocol that will help you assess your VO2 max. That will give you a good baseline number. And then what we do with clients is then we implement some strategic cardiovascular training sessions each week that are progressive in nature between lower and higher intensity exercise, depending on where they are and what they're capable of, to help them improve that number. At the very minimum, what you can do is a 2,000 meter row test. And I've got a protocol that I'd be happy to share. In fact, I'll include the Google Doc link for our 2,000 meter row test here in the show notes. And I'll just have clients do that. And they simply do a 2,000 meter row for time. And we can use a predictive equation to determine what the VO2 max is. But that gives us a really good baseline number that we can work to improve. For those of us that are analytical, it's very eye-opening because instantly we can see where we stack up in terms of what is poor, what is average, what is good, what is elite. And so we've got a benchmark to work from. Now, the second metric that we track, obviously you guys have heard me talk about macronutrients. You've heard me, talk about how our clients track their calorie intake. They track their macronutrients depending on where they are in our kind of operating system process. And we have three distinct phases that we take our clients through, called Prime, called Transform, and called Sustain. And we focus on different things at each kind of juncture, if you will. But initially in the Prime phase, we have and encourage all of our clients to track their intake. Now, we're not just looking at calorie intake, we're also looking at micronutrient intake. And micronutrient is the vitamins and minerals that we're consuming for our food because, like calories matter most when it comes to weight loss. Obviously, macronutrients are important in terms of body composition change. We talk ad nauseum about protein intake and the importance for satiety and lean muscle tissue and joint integrity and yada, yada, yada. But we don't talk much about micronutrition, the vitamins and minerals that literally provide and create the building blocks of our cellular health and function, our hormone production, our detoxification pathways, our recovery, our immunity. And so what we realize is it's not hard to still eat quote unquote clean and still eat healthy foods, but still be deficient in vitamins and minerals, especially given the food landscape that we live in. And so if you're a busy individual, if you eat out a decent amount, if you're high stress, we're burning through these micronutrients consistently, and we're just not getting enough of it in our food because of modern day agriculture, unless you're eating a lot of processed foods, in which case, well, a lot of these are fortified, but still, right? We're still, our most common deficiencies revolve around magnesium, which is instrumental in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of biochemical reactions and energy regulation and stress management and gut health and brain function and blood sugar management. And the list goes on and on. Zinc, vitamin D, omega-3s, B vitamins, iron for women. And so it's what we'll typically look at with our calorie tracking process is also look at just how the micronutrients are adding up and what we need to do from a food standpoint to help fill those gaps. Potassium is a really good one, is a really important mineral and electrolyte that a lot of people are deficient in. We get potassium in things like potatoes and greens and grapes and raisins and avocado and banana. And of course, we can supplement with it, but just like magnesium, people are terribly deficient. So we get a lot of these electrolyte and mineral imbalances. So we use an app called Chronometer to track our macronutrient and our micronutrient intake. And then we work together over time, in addition to some blood work, to get some deeper insights into where and how we can fill those gaps when we factor in lifestyle and nutrition choices and food preferences and schedule and responsibilities and travel and all that good stuff. So that's an important one, is right, because if we want to perform well, if we want to feel great, then it's not just about managing calories. It's about providing cellular health and creating cellular health and function. And so that means we need to focus on micronutrition because, again, is what we're finding with modern day food environment that we're living in. It's easy to be overfed and undernourished. It's easy to consume a ton of calories with very little nutritional value. And so that's where the nuance comes into play of how can we create the most nutritionally dense meal, the most satiating, both physically and psychologically satiating meal while still being able to effectively manage our calorie intake. Number 3 is our blood pressure. And blood pressure is absolutely the silent threat that we can't afford to ignore, especially for some of the guys that we work with, especially if you're a guy in your mid 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, but especially in your 40s, this is the silent killer. And it is the one that is directly tied to heart disease, to stroke, to kidney damage, to health longevity, to deterioration of your blood vessels over time. And it's the thing that most guys in their 40s are at the highest risk for developing, especially with high stress, high pressure, poor sleep environments that we create. And so this really is where, it becomes a non-negotiable for us to really take a look. And it's so simple to assess just from getting a simple blood pressure cuff and doing it a couple times a week, so that, to the degree that early detection equals early prevention, and it's not acceptable to, so our target blood pressure is 120 over 80 systolic over diastolic. Now, a red flag, and all too often I talk to guys that are like, yeah, it's okay, it's pretty good. And that means it's in the 130s, 140s, 150s, over 100 or 110. That's not acceptable. That is a red flag. Anything at or above 130 over 85, to the degree that we need to take action to get that down. And the good news is, and this kind of aligns with the VO2 max, is by simply improving our cardiovascular health and our aerobic capacity, by improving our aerobic base through some basic movement and cardiovascular exercise, we actually can take some huge steps towards immediately lowering our blood pressure. This also lines up directly with the last metric when I talked about the micronutrients, because the minerals that we consume can significantly impact our vascular health. In which case, if we're not getting enough potassium, as an example, like I mentioned, well, then we have a lot higher likelihood of having higher blood pressure. And by simply bumping up potassium, by eating more greens, more potatoes, banana, avocado, supplementing, orange juice, spinach, then we're a lot more likely to be able to naturally bring those blood pressure levels down, which really is remarkable over a relatively short period of time without needing to medicate, assuming, you have that conversation with your doctor. So what we suggest is just getting a simple blood pressure cuff on Amazon. Those are under $50. Measuring a couple, 3 times a week in the morning, wake up, obviously use the restroom. We have our clients weigh in, have a glass of water, sit down and chill for 5 minutes, and then rest you can check your messages, whatever, rest for 5 to 10. You can do meditation and then check your blood pressure. And let's make sure we're paying attention to that. Obviously, improving our sleep, reducing our alcohol intake, managing our stress levels. Like, those are all things that we work through in our coaching program. But at least now that we know how serious are things. And by the way, like, if your blood pressure is high, you need to be very cautious about how you're training and creating a lot of intra-abdominal pressure. So for example, if you're doing heavy squats, if you're doing deadlifts, if you're doing leg presses, if you're doing decline bench exercises, you're creating a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, which is going to significantly jack up your blood pressure, and you're more likely to stroke. Now, this isn't to scare people. Well, it kind of is to scare people, because if your blood pressure is high, you need to take action now, like now. And so talk to your doctor, reach out to me if you're concerned. There's a lot of things that we can do right away to get that under control, but it is more serious than most guys realize. Number 4, blood biomarkers. And you're seeing probably a lot of advertising around different blood optimization, tracking, which is all awesome in my opinion. But this really, your blood biomarkers are your internal dashboard. And this really goes beyond just your typical annual physical, where we're just looking at conventional norms. And like I always say, conventional norms are like comparing your blood work to Homer Simpson. It is not acceptable. We're comparing our norms to the average American who is sick and fat and diseased, and it's not acceptable. So if you are a high performer, if you're someone who wants to be an outlier and wants to truly experience robust health and not just live status quo, then we have to look at optimal metrics and optimal biomarkers. And those revolve around hormones, around inflammation, around blood sugar, around liver, thyroid, lipids. And trust me, it goes beyond just like your quote unquote normal testosterone levels or having a normal total cholesterol. Like, we have to dig under the hood and look at things like, your fasting glucose, your hemoglobin A1C, your fasting insulin, your total and free testosterone, your sex hormone binding globulin, your luteinizing hormone, your estradiol, your DHA, your cortisol. We're looking at markers of inflammation like a C-reactive protein like homocysteine. We're looking at lipids, again, beyond just your total cholesterol. We're looking at triglycerides. We're looking at HDL, LDL ratios. We're looking at ApoB. We're looking at LDL particle size. And then, of course, like thyroid markers, not just TSH, but free T3, free T4, reverse T3. And so we work directly with a couple different labs and testing methodologies that we run for our clientele to really get a comprehensive look at how do we leverage and what do we tackle from a nutrition, from a fitness and from a lifestyle perspective, that's going to positively influence any of the blood markers that are not optimal. And so that helps provide further analytical information for us to make informed decisions. And then lastly, well, number 5 is sleep. And then I'll share a couple quick honorable mention ones. But, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that sleep wasn't important. Obviously, we know it's important, but how do we track it and what metrics can we leverage? A really interesting thing occurred to me, and I shared this through social media, but in case you missed it, I shared it through Instagram. But I had a client for about a little over 18 months now. And for the first year, he experienced very little change despite the fact that he was doing all of the things, quote unquote, doing all of the things right. He was managing his calorie intake. He was in a theoretical calorie deficit. He was getting more than 10,000 steps a day, yada, yada, yada. But what we came to realize was his sleep was very, very disturbed, and kind of took it for granted until the point where, his weight loss was stagnant, until we saw all of the sudden over the past 6 months, we started to see this precipitous decline in body weight, like a pound a week, significant, having changed nothing other than what happened was his sleep schedule changed. And so prior to that 6 months, he had been working a position within his company where he was kind of doing tech support, and he was on call basically every 3 or 4 hours, throughout the day and night. So there were multiple nights per week where he'd have to get up and had to kind of reset the server. And it obviously deeply impacted his sleep to the degree that, he was exhausted a lot. Well, fast forward to 6 months ago, and he shifted positions whereby he could actually get a solid 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Even 6 was a big difference than just the 3 that he had been getting. And all of the sudden, it changed everything for him. Like, weight just started to fall off. And so it's really a perfect example of how significant. And listen, the other thing is sleep. Lack of sleep impacts our food choices and our insulin management and our blood sugar regulation and our energy expenditure and so many other things. But the point is that just getting some consistent sleep for him was the impetus to get the scale moving. And I think for so many of us, myself included, we don't realize just how big of a limiting factor sleep is to hormonal dysfunction, poor food decisions, low recovery, mood swings, fat gain. And so the quality and the quantity of sleep really matters, because we know that one bad night can absolutely tank our HRV. It can drive up our insulin resistance. It can impact our training output. And so what we do is we look at things like, and we leverage things like the Oura Ring, the Apple Watch, the Whoop strap. I use a Garmin watch. I actually don't wear it at night because I don't want the light on my skin, but I do like the Oura Watch or Oura Ring and the Whoop a lot for tracking sleep cycles. And that can give us a lot of really great feedback around how our daily behaviors impact our sleep quality and quantity. And then once we're aware of those behaviors, we can work to obviously change them. For example, alcohol is a great example of whenever I have clients track their sleep cycles and then consume alcohol, invariably their HRV goes down. So their heart rate variability goes down. So they're less recovered. Their resting heart rate goes up, recovery tanks, so on and so forth. And this, holds true for caffeine. It holds true for screen time before bed, in bed. And that gives us the ammunition, if you will, to help really build some quality sleep structure in place, a solid bedtime, solid wake up time, what to supplement with before bed, what to eat before bed, and so on. And so those are the top 5 that we leverage. Now, the other things that we really look at consistently, we look at daily steps. I've talked about steps before. You hear steps everywhere. It is a very, very valuable metric to track that I think, if nothing else, if you simply got a cheap pedometer on Amazon and wore that on your waistband, just to assess how many steps you're accumulating. You might be surprised because more often than not, we think we do more exercise than we actually do. And most of us are terribly sedentary, whether we like to realize it or not. Having that data to be able to look at, that unbiased data to look at and say, yeah, dude, it's the end of the day. You've only gotten 4,000 steps. Well, we really should be looking to 8 to 10,000 steps a day, at least committing to more steps than what we're currently getting. And so that's how we use a pedometer, a watch tracker, the Oura Ring, the Whoop strap, the Apple Watch, the Garmin watch. Again, just a waistband pedometer can go a long way. And then lastly, the last metric that we look at that I think is important, I don't think it's as important as the other ones that I already shared, but it does fall in line with the kind of macronutrient and micronutrient intake, is fiber intake. And I think it's a really valuable tool, especially if someone is dieting, to help create a plan whereby someone is getting a lot of food, a lot of high volume, high fiber, high water, high satiety foods for a relatively low caloric density. Obviously, there's a ton of health benefits to consuming fiber around, prebiotics, gut health, hormone management, detoxification, satiety, blood sugar support. But by tracking this in our calorie tracking app, then it can help us make informed decisions around what foods we're choosing to eat, how those foods make us feel in between meals, how much hungry we're getting or satisfied we're staying. And ultimately, it's also going to contribute to, our macronutrient or micronutrient intake and, really just putting all of those pieces together. So I hope that has been helpful for you. That's how I think about and kind of the main metrics that we leverage in our coaching business that I would strongly encourage you to start tracking if you're looking for analytical data that's going to help you make decisions that are in line with improving your health and help you move the needle right away without getting lost down the road of looking at things that don't necessarily help us make immediate change. I am all for diagnostic testing, but when we start doing genetic testing, when we start doing longevity testing, when we start doing potentially unnecessarily like adrenal, cortisol, gut health testing, detoxification testing, and you don't already have these fundamental principles in place, then we're simply going to be spinning our wheels. We're going to be spending unnecessary time and energy and creating undue stress around things that, again, aren't helping us move the needle. And you're always going to have to come back to these foundational metrics anyways. So why not build these in? And then if you need to go down that deeper diagnostic route, then you can do that because you've already established the foundation. Hope that's helpful. And look forward to catching you guys in the next episode.